have, as we mentioned, a number of people out. Is Patty okay tonight, David? Or no? Okay. Richard's had some issues this week with his heart, and Brother Gene mentioned several in his prayer. He mentioned Janet Gilbert. Janet had successful surgery to clear up an obstruction in her intestines, and she's doing real well. They did not have to actually cut anything out, so that was great, and they appreciate our prayers as well. All right, we in our reading tonight, we have finished the book of Lamentations and have begun the book of Ezekiel. From Sunday morning, we were the whole book of Lamentations was covered. It only has how many chapters? 5, right? And I wanted to call attention just to 2 or 3 things. Again, Lamentations is about the sorrow over what? The destruction of Jerusalem, right? And so the sorrows are given in manifold ways in chapter 1. And in chapter 2, I remember when we went through this months ago, maybe it's been a year or so by now, I don't remember, but who is responsible? It's just, I don't know if you can see my Bible, but I underlined all the personal pronouns. He, who is it, Randy? You were going to answer? Who is responsible for their captivity? Well, themselves, but God is the one who is punishing them. Yeah, He hath cast down from heaven. The Lord has swallowed up all the inhabitants. He hath thrown down. He hath cut off in fierce. He hath drawn back. He hath been his bow. They were ultimately responsible, yes, but it was the Lord who was actually doing that. And of course, He worked through whom? What the Babylonians. In chapter 3, He shows that relief can come, and God is not wanting, all of them to be cut off. There is passage in verse 22. It is of the Lord's loving kindnesses that we are not consumed, because His compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Our song that we like to sing is from these verses. So the Lord is still merciful. He will spare a remnant. In chapter 4, He makes the point that how bad the situation was. Notice down in verse 10 of chapter 4, the hands of the pitiful women have boiled their own children. They were their food in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Just the terrors that accompanied the destruction of Jerusalem. And in verse 13, why? Why was it? It was because of the what? Yes, sins of her prophets, the iniquities of her priests. They have shed the blood of the just in the midst of her, even how they had dealt with people like Jeremiah, in fact, and other prophets. And so in the 5th chapter, there's a prayer for God to remember them and to restore them. In the end of verse 21, renew our days as of old. And there is the answer, or the request for God to remember them, and He did. He did. They would go into Babylonian captivity for how many years? About 70. And from the original deportation to the time when Cyrus would issue the decree that they could return. So in Ezekiel is actually, we have Daniel carried away in deportation number 1, and Daniel was taken over into where? Babylon. Jeremiah was taken over in deportation number 2, and he was not necessarily in Babylon, close by, but by the, what's that? Did I say Jeremiah, or did I say Ezekiel? Did I say Jeremiah? Okay, I'm sorry. I meant Ezekiel. Jeremiah stayed where? Yeah, in Jerusalem. That was a slip-up, so my part. What I was thinking was Ezekiel was carried over to the river Kibar, and he is there, and really he's announcing that God is going to restore what? Again, this is kind of seen in highly figurative language, especially in later chapters. He's going to bring his people back to in fact, he shows how God had exited his temple. That's his temple, his city, and how God would put another temple there. And it's not a physical temple, but it's the temple of God would be the church under the Messiah. Okay, let's go now to the life of Christ. We don't have a whole lot of time. I kept thinking that today we would have our first Wednesday night. That's next week, but today is actually the last day of the month, and so I was thinking about that earlier. We still don't have a whole lot of time. So what we're going to do right now is I want to review us. First of all, in the life of Jesus, we have the years of what? Preparation with the birth of John, Jesus, early work of John in the wilderness of Judea. And then the beginning ministry we only remember it begins with what event? Jesus' baptism. His temptation follows, and then those early chapters of John 1, 2, 3, and the first part of 4. So 3 to 6 months go by probably in that beginning ministry. And then John is in prison. He has been preaching for a while up in Enon near Salem because there was much water. Jesus has been preaching down in the Judean area. And so when the Pharisees find out that Jesus is baptizing more disciples than John 4 says, he wants to get out of there. He wants to leave and go north to Galilee. And then Matthew's account indicates that, that there was a vacuum created there toward Galilee because of where John had been. So he leaves. I thought I heard. So he leaves and goes up, and then John 4, the woman at the well, and then she influences a lot of people from what city? Samaria. Many people believed on the Lord through her word. Then when the Lord came, stayed 2 days, many believed on him through his own word. All right, and so he goes. Let's think about this. He goes when he gets in Cana. He goes to what city first? David. Starts with a C. Cana. Oh. Did I say that? I'm sorry. I am. Cana. Okay. Yeah, but I thought David said Capernaum. Okay. Woo. Okay. So. Yeah. Okay, so he goes to Cana first, and he heals the nobleman's son who is over in Capernaum. Right. Then he goes to Nazareth and reads from Isaiah 61 and applies it to himself as the Messiah. Then what do they want to do to him? Throw him off the brow of the hill. He leaves Nazareth and then goes, David, to Capernaum. And that's where we've gotten a lot of things going on. So once he moves to Capernaum, he calls the 4 disciples to follow him. Oh, by the way, when he comes to Capernaum, actually that was prophesied in Isaiah. True or false? Yeah, Isaiah 9, that Zebulun and Naphtali, this area right up in here, Galilee. Okay, so he calls the 4 disciples to follow him. Who are they? Peter, Andrew, James, and John. What their occupations are? Fishermen. And what are they doing when Jesus actually sees them? First, cleaning their net, mending their nets. And so he tells Peter, gets in Peter's boat, pushes out just a little, and what does he do among the people who are there? Preaches to them. And then he says, Peter, why don't you cast on out, go on out in the deep. And he said, Lord, we've toiled all night and caught nothing, but at thy word we will. So they go out and have to motion to James and John to come out and help them. And the boats begin to sink. And then Peter falls down and says, depart from me, I'm a sinful man, O Lord. And then the Lord tells them all, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. All right, now what city are we close by that is making headquarters? Capernaum. And just keep in mind, when you look at the Sea of Galilee, it's about 11 o'clock. If you want to look at the Sea of Galilee as a clock, that's about where he was. He teaches in the synagogue on a Sabbath day, and he heals a demoniac that we talked about Sunday morning. And last Wednesday night, I think it was. And then he cast them out, and the demons speaking through the man say, "We know who you are. You are the Holy One of God." Yeah. And so he says, I don't want that kind of publication, that kind of endorsement. And so he casts them out, and the people are amazed. And so he teaches in the synagogue, and then his amazement, his fame spreads in Galilee, and we saw his power over the spirit beings. And then we talked about Sunday morning, he heals Peter's mother-in-law as well as others in these passages in Mark 1, Matthew 8, and Luke 4. Mark records the event earlier, while Matthew records it later. And when we talked about that Sunday morning, we noticed the variety of Jesus' miracles. They're healings, but they're all kinds of healings. What was Peter's mother-in-law problem? Had a great fever. Then we have demons, and then we have all manner of sickness. Matthew 4 mentions epilepsy, or as the King James calls it, a lunatic. And then in Mark 2, that we'll get to here in just a moment, we have a man who is a paralytic. He's on a bed. He's paralyzed. And so all manner of problems are cured. We went through this Sunday morning. Okay, so he heals the mother-in-law. Now he tours Galilee preaching and teaching in Matthew 4, Mark 1, and Luke 4. Let's go through these passages, and then we'll move right along. Let's start, David, if you would read for us the passage here in Matthew, the 4th chapter, verses 23 through 25. It's a type of a summary statement, and also the Waldrons make the point in their book, and I try to also in my little booklet, that there are evidently more tours that Jesus took of Galilee that we just have a summary of. We don't have specifics, but it seems evident. Okay, 4:23 through 25, David? Okay, thank you. Richard, you've got the King James, don't you? In verse 24 of what David read, almost toward the end, those who were possessed with demons, and then what else does it say? Lunatics, and then palsied. And what does your translation have for palsied after epileptics, David? Paralytics, and then he healed them. So you get a variety here. I have always thought that the word lunatic was kind of a neat word, used in the King James. What version do you use, Randy? The New King James? Is yours the New King James, Randy? It's King James. Okay. I've often wondered, what's the background on the word lunatic? Actually, the word that is translated here for epileptic is from the Greek word that has moon in it. Moonstruck is the idea. And of course, the Latin for our word moon is lunar, lunus. And so we've got that idea of an epileptic that would go into a seizure. People got the idea that the moon may have had some kind of an effect. That was a common thought. And so the idea of a lunatic, moonstruck, was really close to the original language, the idea. Epileptic is more as to what the person was. And you know where my mind goes sometimes. I couldn't help but think, when I was restudying all this, the loony Tunes, the cartoons that came out in the 1930s all the way up to, 1970 maybe? The Looney Tunes. Guess what that's after? The same thing, lunatic. They're just crazy. They're crazy little creatures. But anyway, so here you have people who, can you imagine? We know now that there can be brain disorders going on that can cause someone to have a seizure, and there are medical procedures to try to keep them from swallowing their tongue and keep their head back to try to. But back then, there didn't have much understanding of that, and so for Jesus to be able to heal somebody of epilepsy, that's working on some brain disorder. To cure somebody of a disease, that perhaps a bacterial or viral infection. Somebody who is paralyzed, I don't know if it's a nerve damage or maybe somebody fell on something and hit their neck or hit their back in the wrong way, and whatever it was, their nerve endings can be repaired immediately. So it shows Jesus' power over every area of human existence, over every area of our physical being. And then, of course, we'll see in Mark 2 and the related passages when the paralytic comes, he knows even what their reasoning in their thoughts are. So all of that shows the deity of Jesus, really. And all. Okay, we read Matthew. Let's go to Mark. Kirsten, Mark 1, 35 through 39, please. Mark 1, 35 through 39. And here we're going to find something that's not recorded either in Matthew or Luke that Jesus does. And tell me what it is before we read it. He goes out early and prays. Yes. Okay, 35 through 39, Kirsten. Okay, so he has crowds thronging all around him, and now a great while before day, 3 o'clock in the morning, perhaps, 2 o'clock in the morning, middle of the night, he gets up and he goes out into a deserted place so he could be what? Alone, obviously alone. It's interesting when we'll see this in Luke's account a little later. The prayer life of Jesus. He makes particular time for prayer in privacy and lengthy prayer. I had thought years ago when I was trying to get more serious about Bible study, I had thought, well, why in the world would Jesus need to pray? I mean, he's in constant communion with the Father. Why? I mean, it looks like that would almost be an unnecessary thing unless maybe he just wanted to give a person a good example. But I think that's all wrong. Lee, what do you think? You think that's all wrong too, don't you? Comment, question, Brother Gene? Any idea on that? Yes. I think you're exactly right. Yes. Yes.
At some point, that was there. You can see that. I think here he is, and basically he's a unique individual. He make up what he did to the man. Really alone on earth.
He is. There's nobody.
When he tries to speak the wisdom of the ages to the apostles, they wanted his own.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
They missed the point so far.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. How much more so? Yeah, and sometimes people who didn't want to understand him. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's a pretty good analogy. I think you hit on it exactly right. While he is deity, he also was fully human, just like we are. And from all of the humanity coming forth of him, there was that need to communicate with the Father, to express his desires, to beseech his help. And it's like Brother McGarvey says on another spot that I think I've already recorded. I think it was in Luke 2 when Jesus advanced in stature and wisdom and favor with God and man. How you separate those areas of deity and humanity is past our finite minds, I think, too. But just recognize that there are the two natures: the physical, the spiritual side of the physical Jesus, the spiritual side, knowing what is in man, knowing the will of God, all of that, and yet still there is that need to communicate with the Lord, and he does obviously provide us a wonderful example that if Jesus needed that in the flesh, certainly we do also, to make time for that. Yes, ma'am. What? Yes. Yeah. Why do we have to pray if he already knows what we need? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes, I think that's exactly right. I don't know if everybody could hear, but Lee is reminding me of a young man who asked one time, why do we need to pray if God already knows what we need before we ask? And McGarvey, again, has some great comments on that in his commentary on Matthew and Mark, in Matthew the 6th chapter. Pray ye after this manner, then the Lord gives the model prayer. And the idea is that we pray to God not because God needs to have an information list, but we pray to God because we need to know our dependency upon him. And we need to articulate those needs to God. Oftentimes we can think thoughts, but until we articulate those thoughts in words to perhaps our spouse, child, parent, whoever it is, just the articulation makes us focus in. We can have, if you're like I am, you can have a lot of random thoughts that are circulating in your mind at all times. You can be thinking about 1,000 things at one time, and they're random and they're going in, but you're not focusing to the point that you have to put it in a sentence. And when we address God and we're addressing him in sentences, and we're thinking about, we're focused in our thinking, then that helps us. But it also, we don't know all the ways that God answers our prayers, providentially and otherwise. And so I think all of those bear back on they bear back on what Jesus is doing here with the in the prayers, and taking time, going out early in the morning before day, finding a private place. So anyway. Yep, Lazarus, he wept over Lazarus' death. Yeah. 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 Spirit. Mm-hmm.
Jesus had that same battle to overcome his flesh with his spirit.
Yes, that we have. Mm-hmm.
The spirit won the whole thing.
Yes.
That passage about the fall of man that says that my spirit will not strive with man.
Yes.
Because he is also
Flesh, in Genesis 6. Yeah. Yeah. conflict.
conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yes.
and we realize that ourselves.
Exactly. You made me think about something when in the temptation of Jesus, after, I think it's Luke's account says, afterwards angels ministered to him. And so here he was praying during that time. And he knew what was ahead of him. And so he's praying for strength to continue to carry everything out in the flesh that was God's will. And he needed help. He needed courage to do that from a fleshly point of view. And of course, as Brother Gene mentioned, he never made a mistake. I like to go back to the passage in Hebrews 4 where he says, having therefore a great high priest who hath passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we have not a high priest that cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but one that hath been in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. So he can. The double negative emphasizes a positive. We have not a high priest that cannot be touched. That means he can know. He does know the feeling of our infirmities. He does know what it's all about. And he was tempted in all ways like as we, yet without sin. There's a difference. Always remember whenever your maybe mind wanders, could Jesus have ever done this wrong or that? Well, there's a difference between being tempted to do wrong and what? The actual doing of wrong, whether it be the mental aspect, the physical. To think about something and then dismiss it is not necessarily sin if it's a wrong thought. It comes in your mind and then you try to dismiss it. But to fantasize on things that are wrong, well, then that's a different matter. And so he was tempted as we, yet without sin. Okay, let's go to Luke's account. Yes, sir.
You mentioned something about the garden that brought to my mind when he rebuked the disciples for falling asleep. And he said, watch and pray lest you enter into temptation.
For the
spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
yes.
And possibly that prayer and his conversation with the Father helped him get through those temptations. And he was trying to display that to the disciples.
Yes, I think that's a good point. I think that's a really good point, David. I think that's exactly right. All of the, there in the garden, the humanity of Jesus is really accentuated in that. Father, if it be thy will, let this go. Well, he knew that the reason he'd come to earth was to die, one of the reasons. But he knew that, and yet everything in his flesh was dreading what he had to undergo. You know?
A couple of times you said, I'm struggling through it.
Yes. Yeah.
He knew that for certainty, but yet there was some distance between the actual moment of,
Yes, and when he said it. Yes.
we can anticipate, worry about something that we got to do, get done,
But when the time draws nigh,
closer you get to it, the higher than God you get.
exactly right. I have thought about men who are going to be executed, when it's way off or they're appealed. Sure, they're thinking about it, but I have visualized how it must be to walk down and then they put you on the gurney and your arms are outstretched and they put the IV in. You're still awake and you know how the anxiety that there's got to be there. I certainly believe that's right. Okay, Sister Bobby, you mind read? Let's read Luke's account, Luke 4:42 through 44. Luke 4:42 through 44. Okay, so they're trying to keep him in one place, and his point is, I've got to go to other places and preach. Let's answer some of these questions on page 40. Jesus tours Galilee. I mentioned in the note the next several sections we will study occur during a tour he makes through Galilee with the 4 fishermen he's called. When he returns to Capernaum, he will call Matthew or Levi to follow, and then his miracles will cause enthusiasm among the multitudes as well as hostility among the Pharisees. Also good to note that these passages, along with others such as Luke 8, indicate Jesus made several preaching tours through Galilee, some of which, such as this one, we have no details. We'll see when he comes to back to Capernaum after this preaching tour and he heals the paralytic, that this will be the first instance where the hostility begins. And the Pharisees are going to say, he blasphemes. He says he can forgive sins. Who can do that but God? And so that's the first notice that we've had of any real hostility. But we're not there yet. Let's answer our questions. Keep in mind that Jesus is making the little city of what? His base of operations. Capernaum. Read Mark 1, we did. We're doing this because his account seems to give the closest chronological account. In the morning, a great while before day, he awakened, left Simon Peter's house, and went into a, what kind of place? Solitary, right, or deserted place to do what? To pray. He must have left them unannounced, because what did Simon do? He searched for him and then found him. Peter told Jesus that everyone was looking for him. Jesus answered he wanted to go elsewhere into other towns in order to do what? To preach. In fact, preaching was one of the reasons he came to earth. They left Capernaum and went into their synagogues throughout all of Galilee, preaching and casting out demons. Galilee's length at its extreme point was about approximately 63 miles, extreme width about 33 miles. According to Josephus, it contained 240 towns and villages. The preaching tour is estimated to have taken 4 or 5 months. And then synagogue, I thought that what Brother McGarvey mentioned was really good. He says the word synagogue is compounded of the 2 Greek words soon together and ago to collect. It's therefore equivalent to our English word meeting house, to gathering together. The synagogue originated during the Babylonian captivity, was brought into the motherland by the returning exiles. Certain it is that the synagogue only came into historic prominence after the books of the Old Testament were written. At the time of our Savior's ministry, synagogues were scattered all over Palestine and also over all quarters of the earth whither the Jews had been dispersed. Synagogues were found in very small villages, for wherever the men of leisure willing and able to devote themselves to the service of the synagogue were found, a synagogue might be erected. In the synagogues, the people met together on the Sabbath to pray, to listen to the reading of portions of the Old Testament, and to hear such instruction or exhortation as might be furnished. With the permission of the president of the synagogue, anyone who was fitted might deliver an address. Thus, synagogues furnished Jesus and later his disciples also in the book of Acts with a congregation and a suitable place for preaching. We find that on weekdays Jesus often preached in the open air, but the synagogues are thus particularly mentioned, probably because in them were held the most important services, because they were necessary during the rainy and cold season, and because their use shows that as yet the Jewish rulers had not so prejudiced the public mind as to exclude Jesus from the houses of worship. It's interesting to me that when we read the book of Acts, the synagogues are where the apostles will do what? Or where they go first. They go first. Remember, the gospel was to go first to the Jews and then to the Greeks, Romans 1, 16, 17. And that was, it was a wise move, because usually you would have people who were more familiar with what? The Scripture, the Old Testament Scripture. And so just to show, it's kind of like, you got people on different parts of the spectrum, spiritual spectrum. Here you have people who don't know, they have no clue of who God is. They have no clue of the Old Testament. They don't know if there's a God or many gods. And then you have here what would have been, let's say, faithful Jews who had been schooled in the law. They knew there was only one God, that pagan gods are nothing. And they've been schooled in all that. They're looking for the Messiah, and they're ready, they're eager, and all of a sudden the apostles come and start to. So you should have, all things being equal, you should have more of a receptive audience in synagogues than you'd have anywhere. You have people who are farther along in their spiritual development. So they went there. But was that always the case? That was not always the case, because there was prejudice that had been built up and would be built up later by those who were against the Lord. All right, number 3 down at the bottom. Read Matthew 4, we did, to learn the extent of his influence. Besides Galilee, reports of Jesus' teaching and preaching reached where? Syria. And great crowds followed him from Galilee, where he was, then over to the east, Decapolis, then down south to Jerusalem, as well as the province surrounding it, which was Judea, and from beyond the Jordan, a land called Perea, which means beyond. When you think about the Jordan River, guys, everything is written as if the writer is over here, and so beyond means beyond the river, as if you were standing over here in Israel proper. That makes sense. Okay. Matthew 4:23 mentions that Jesus preached and healed all kinds of what? Diseases and sicknesses. And if you're mentioned, excuse me, name those specifically mentioned. All right, anybody? Demon possessions, lunatics or epileptics, palsied or paralytic, torments, those holden with disease, torment. We would call them chronic illnesses. They were just always there. Looks like some diseases would have been something that might have come on somebody in a very brief time, and they had to deal with that. But the sicknesses, or holden with sicknesses, as King James says in some, holden, to be held, to grabbed and not let go, is the idea, would be chronic. It's just always a problem that somebody's having physically. Keep in mind, miracles Jesus performed were for the purpose of creating what? Faith in those who were hearing. That's right. Okay, we got about 7 minutes. Let's look at these passages, the next passage, and let's go to Mark's account first. Lee, why don't you read Mark? I have a chart I want to show you. Here is a chart showing the areas: Jerusalem and Judea, Perea, which would be beyond the river, Decapolis, and Syria. So people were hearing all about Jesus. Word was spreading, and people were following up here to the point that he had no leisure time. He had to go, outside. Okay, so now Jesus heals a leper, and a lot of excitement is created. Lee, if you would, let's go to Mark's account first. Mark 1:40 through 45. Mark 1:40 through 45.
Now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him and saying to him, "If you are willing, you can be clean." But Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, "I am willing, be cleansed." As soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. And he strictly warned him and sent him away at once, and said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go your way, show yourself to the priests, and offer for your cleansing those things which Moses commanded as a testimony to them." However, he went out and began to proclaim it freely, and to spread the matter, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places, and they came to him from every direction.
Okay, so here a leper comes to him. He's beseeching, he's talking with him, and then he does what? Verse 40. No, what does the leper do? He's beseeching him, and then he kneels down right before Jesus. And what's that? Yes, very much like Peter. Right, David. And It's an interesting question he raises. If you will, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. That expresses what that the leper had? Faith, confidence. And so it was not if you can, it was if you will. He knew that the Lord could do it. It was just a case of, would you do it? And so Jesus said he was moved with what? Compassion, verse 41. And he stretched forth his hand and he touched him and said, I take it to be as if, like, say for instance, Lee's a leper. I come, be thou clean. And as soon as he touched him and said, be thou clean, what happened? The leprosy was gone. Now, if the one of the reasons that lepers would, hold their hands up unclean was because if someone touched them, that person became what? Ceremonially unclean. And, not necessarily would they get leprosy, they might, but they became ceremonially unclean. And so you might think, well, did Jesus risk the idea of becoming ceremonially unclean? And the answer is obviously no, because as soon as he touched him, the leprosy left. The leprosy left. And so the man was cleansed of his leprosy. It's interesting. All the cases of leprosy, it's never they were healed of their leprosy, they were cleansed of their leprosy. A little difference there. You look, yes, sir, David. That's right. That's exactly right. It probably just for him to know, I'm making you well. And he stretched forth his hand and touched him. You're going to say something, sweetie? Mm-hmm.
Leprosy stands in the scripture.
It's a type of sin.
As a picture of sin.
Yes.
And so if you think about cleansing,
Yeah.
leprosy,
Cleansing sin. Exactly. Yeah. Good point. All right. Let's look at the other passages that deal with it. Matthew 8 verses 2 through 4. Brother Randy, if you would. Matthew 8, 2 through 4. Why don't you read one? This right after the sermon on them, just with that first paragraph, 1 through 4. Matthew 8, 1 through 4. All right, thank you. We don't have this right here. We do in the note, but Leviticus 13 and 14 are the two chapters back to back that deal with the test of leprosy that the priest would administer, and then in 14 you have the the sacrifices that would be made known or would be brought by the leper whose cleansing had been affected. Now, this was no small thing. Why don't you go show yourself to a priest? Where is Jesus doing this? What city? Up in Galilee. We do know where this one was. He comes back to, in Luke's account, I guess it is, Luke 5. He's what? Where Home Depot? Capernaum. That's right. He's right outside Capernaum. And so here's where the leper is cleansed. And where does he have to go to show himself to the priest and offer the sacrifices? What city? Jerusalem. So he's got the better part of 60, 70 miles to go one way to fulfill what Jesus has to say, to fulfill the law. Once he got there to the priest, and the priest would find out what had happened, then it would show the priest that Jesus had respect for the law. Here's a man who has leprosy, he's been cleansed, and Jesus has told him to go back and show himself to the priest, offer the sacrifices the law of Moses dictated. So you've got the respect for the law on the part of Jesus. You have also the idea, I don't want you to tell everybody right now, let's go do what we're supposed to do insofar as the law is concerned. And he did not want people following him just to see miracles work. And so the timetable, all of those things played a part of it. Let's at least read, and we're going to have to stop, Luke 5:12 through 16. Brother Gene, if you would. Luke 5:12 through 16, Luke's account here. Luke 5:12 through 16.
While he was in one of the cities, behold, there was a man covered with leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and implored him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. He stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy left him. And he ordered him to tell no one, but go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing, just as Moses commanded, as a testimony to them. But the news about him was spreading even farther, and large crowds were gathering to hear him and be healed of their sickness. And Jesus himself would often slip away to the wilderness and pray.
All right, good. So Luke's account states basically the same thing. The Lord told him, I want you to go show the priest. It will be a testimony to them that you've been cleansed. And then he said, I don't want you to do something. What did he not want him to do? Yes, to publish the fact that the Lord had healed him at this point. Now, sometimes on other occasions, he's fine with that. This will be one of several times that he will say, I don't want you to tell anybody. And again, I don't know of a single passage that tells us why, but if you put the whole scope of Jesus' life together and what was going on with the crowds coming, who wanted to come just to see miracles, you could see, well, the timetable of Jesus he did not want people just to perceive him as a miracle worker. He wanted people to listen to his teaching, to be moved by the preached word. And so I think those are all could be purposes behind it, though it doesn't state it specifically. Comment or question while we're wrapping up?